Animation. Love it or hate it, it's been around for over a century now and doesn't seem like it's stopping anytime soon. From hand-drawn animations, to 3D graphics, to stop-motion animation, there's plenty of different mediums and forms of expression when it comes to animating. But what if you're trying to get into animating as a hobby or as a beginner? Well, during my time of animating for roughly 7 to 8 years, I've had the privilege and opportunity to try a bunch of different animation softwares and work with them and experiment and try different things. And in my testing, in my experience, and in my personal opinion, I believe sticknodes is probably the best beginner app for animation out there. Not only does it have a completely free version of the app that has a majority of the features in the pro version, so that way you can basically get your bearings, but the pro version or the paid version of the app is only like $4. So in this video, I'll be going over the basics of sticknodes as a program, showcasing a bunch of its different features to you, and then I will walk you guys through creating your first 2 animation. Before we get started, however, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, as it really helps me a lot as a content creator, and while you're at it, hit the notification bell to always be aware of when I upload new content, new videos, etc. With all of that out of the way though, let's jump straight into showcasing the app and all of its features. Alright, so as I'm getting into the showcase, I think it's important to mention that this will be for the pro version, although most of, if not basically everything that I'm showcasing in this video will also apply to the free version, just in case you don't have the free version, or just in case you don't have the pro version, sorry. Basically, you know, anything that I showcase here, you should be able to do on any version of sticknodes, right? Even if it's like an older version of the app. As long as you have like a majority of the basic features that I'm going to be showcasing. So let's get into this by just going over like the main interface right here, right? Obviously we have our little stick figure dude, right? We can move him around by selecting the little circular joints on his body. These are called nodes, right? That's just like a colloquial term that's like used for them. You can pose him around, do whatever you want with him, right? You can also delete him, you can undo, you can redo. What else? You can flip him around both ways, right? Horizontal and vertical, by using these little buttons. You can copy and paste the stick figure, right? You can also copy and paste the properties of the stick figure. For example, if you want like a stick figure that has like, let's say, a red tint on it, right? You can copy and paste the properties of it and then paste it, and then see, now we have 2. Same color and everything. Okay, let me reset him back to normal. Okay, so this is pro exclusive to my knowledge, right? But here you can see all the different filters that come in the pro version, right? You can invert the colors, you can lower the opacity. I think that's in the free version also. You can shift the hues of the figure that you're using to be like different colors. You can increase the saturation also. As seen here, you can make it more saturated, you can make it completely black and white, like a cool cartoon. One of the recent things that has been added is pixelating, so you can make things pixelated now if you want to, like a sprite, you know, which I honestly think looks pretty cool. I already showcased the tinting, but you can tint it whatever color you want, you know, and if you have a figure that has multiple different parts, you can choose to tint or like add filters to a specific part and not the entire thing. We have the outline feature here, which basically just, you know, as it explains, or as it, you know, in the name, it basically adds an outline to whatever figure you're increasing the outline on. And you can make it more thick, less thick, you can make the opacity of the outline lower, greater. Here's the blur. You can blur your character, you can add a motion blur, which is just like a different type of blur. You can make it only appear from one angle rather than like around the entire stick figure. Here's the glow, right, which will allow you to, as the name suggests, add glow to your figure. You can customize the glow how you want, you know, increase the intensity, lower the intensity, opacity, all that. Drop shadows, which I also think are pretty sick, basically lets you add a shadow to your characters, like automatically, that like follows wherever your character's at. You can increase or decrease the blur and like the angle and the distance of it, so you can make it go like really far away from your character if you want to. So this is pretty useful for like having a character against like a background, right? Like a wall. Like if you ever want to showcase like, you know, like, oh, he's sitting against a wall right here, you know, like this is a flat object obviously, but then it gives it kind of like a depth, right? And then segment tools, if you want to basically invert a specific node or a specific segment and not the entire figure, this is what you would use to do that, right? You can also change the segment colors, right? So if you wanted to give them an orange shirt, you can do that. Or if you wanted to add gradients, you can. You can also change the angle of the gradients, as you can see. And then here, you can mess with the thickness, right? And when you make it 0, it becomes invisible. So now it just has a floating hand form, you know? Or you can increase the length and make it elongated, right? You can also add a stretchy feature, which just lets you pull it yourself, you know? And you can also curve it using this little handle right here. I believe there should also be, yep, there's also this if you like using this. But personally, I think using this little like handle right here is better because it moves quicker than if you were to use the dial right there, the little buttons. So that's basically the gist of like the main interface right here that you'll be using when you're like animating. But that's not everything that we have to showcase. Well, this video is sponsored by my Ko-fi. Yep, that's right, I'm plugging myself again. So if you guys haven't seen my Ko-fi, I basically just post a bunch of free assets and occasionally paid assets for sticknodes and other programs, so that way you guys can get your grubby little hands on them and do different stuff with them, like make animations, or just use them as studying resources and things of that nature. I've had it open for about a year now and some change, and I'm very close to 200 followers, so if you want to support me and maybe even donate some money, which you don't have to, by the way, it's completely optional, consider checking out my Ko-fi, and while you're there, you might as well look at my card link, which has a link to a bunch of my other socials and stuff like that if you want to check me out on other platforms. And with all that out of the way, let's get back into the video. Alright, so now let's get into the tweened frames, I guess you could say, right? So, starting here, right, you can add a frame and delete a frame, right? We can also copy and paste frames, right? If you want to copy and paste a frame that's already existing, here I'll show you an example. You can copy, paste, same frame, right? And if you play the animation, he's moving, right? But then, if you tap on the frame, right, or if you tap on the little box right here, you can't really see my fingers, but just assume that I'm tapping on the little box, right? You'll see this basically new menu pop up, right? And depending on what you tap in the screen, you can get like different menus and stuff to pop up. But this is specifically in reference to like the frames, right? So if you're looking here, right, you'll see add tweened frame, and what a tweened frame is basically like an interpolation of two existing frames. So let's say I have his arm down, and then I have his arm up in the air, right? If I move his arm up in the air, and then I add a tweened frame in between these, it's gonna basically guesstimate, or come up with a mathematical like equation to basically smooth in between these two frames. So now there's an extra frame in the middle, whereas before, it would just look like this. And you can also adjust the amount of tween in your frame. So like if you want it to be 30%, if you want it to be 10%, and then you can use that to basically smooth out your animations. Now in the future, I plan on making like a tutorial on how to basically use tweened frames to like their maximum capacity, in like different ways you can use them and different ways you can like edit them. But I feel like that's too long of a subject to handle in like a video like this where I'm just going over the basics of the app. So moving on from that, I already showed how to add, delete a frame and all that. Now I'm gonna briefly showcase, right, the figure creator, or the figure editor, I guess you could say, right, which would be this. Okay, this is creation mode within sticknodes, and what creation mode allows you to do is pretty self-explanatory. You can create basically whatever you want as long as it includes nodes and different shapes and stuff. And the possibilities are like pretty endless in that aspect. Like you can make almost anything, especially with like the tools that are at your disposal. Now I'm not very good at stick making, so I'm not gonna be able to like go over and explain what all of this stuff does. But here you can see all the different shapes at the top, right? You can see segment, rounded segment, circle, ellipse, and all that, and those basically just have an effect of changing whatever shapes you're using to create, right? As you can see, those just change whatever shapes you're using when you're creating in the stick, you know? Here you can also mess with different aspects of the stick figure. You can add smart stretch, which basically just like moves everything all at once when you're stretching, rather than just moving the segment that you're pulling, right? So say I had like a wristband on his arm here, right? If I had smart stretch, right, it would move this, and it would move the wristband that's on his arm, because they would both be connected to the same thing, right? There's also static. You can make things basically like invisible in, you know, like the main interface, right? Alright guys, so before we get into like actually creating our first animation within sticknodes, I briefly just wanted to touch on the Movieclips and Sprite library, because I kind of forgot to bring it up earlier. So basically what Movieclips are like pre-made, kind of already existing animations that you can load into whatever project you're working on. So like if I wanted, let's say, an aura, right, I can grab one of these Movieclips, import it, delete this guy real quick, and then you can choose to have it animated on every frame, or have it just be a single frame that you can manipulate yourself, right? So if I choose animated, and then I hit frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, you can see how the Movieclip automatically changes corresponding to whatever frame, you know, it's basically on, right? And then down here, you can also choose whatever starting frame you want for the Movieclip, which is very helpful. And then the sprite library is pretty self-explanatory. You can basically just make sprites, PNGs, whatever you want. So I'm going to take a PNG. Let's see if I can find a good one. Here, let's take Karenma. Alright. And I will put Karenma in here. Sprite test. Right, you can name the sprite. You can also choose to make it transparent or not. You can give it anti-aliasing, which is just like smoothing or like sharpening the image, right? And then here's your sprite. You can also shrink it. I can grab it with my hand, yep. You can shrink it, horizontal and vertical. And yeah. Now, with all that out of the way, right, I'm going to basically jump to a time lapse of me animating these beginner, you know, animations for sticknodes. And while I'm animating this, there's going to be me talking in the background and basically explaining to you guys, you know, how you can create something like this, and just walking you through the process. And then once each animation is done, I'll play it for you guys, so that way you guys can see the basically final product of the animation. So the first animation that I figured would be like a good starting animation to do for beginners is a bouncing ball, which is like a common exercise that different animators do, or different like animation programs will have you do, whether it be like professional or just like commonly like learning how to do it. And the reason why it's a very common exercise for animators to do is because it has a lot of different fundamental animation principles. And for people who are just getting into animation, you may be like, principles? What type of animation principles are you talking about? In that case, I would recommend you watch a video by Alan Becker known as the 12 Principles of Animation, which goes over the 12 principles, at least like in their most basic form. It's like a very useful starting video for animators. And I also have a couple of tutorials in my series called Do versus Don't that go over some of the basic animation principles like easing and posing and things of that nature. But the main attraction of the bouncing ball is just like how simple it is, and it can also be really fun to just animate like a ball bouncing around like different areas. Like it's simple, but it's also like really effective as an exercise. And the main thing that I would stress for newer animators is just to like take your time and really look at like what you're animating and try to make sure that it looks smooth in the final product, and focus on like the in-between frames, not just the keyframes, but also focus on making everything look good when it bounces up and down. Make sure it looks like an actual ball that has weight and not just like a floating object, you know. With all that out of the way though, I'm going to show like the final product of what this bouncing ball animation looks like, and then we can move on to the second one, which is slightly more complex but still pretty easy to do for beginners. Alright, so the second animation I'm going to be doing is personally a run cycle. You could either do a walk cycle or a run cycle, but I think a run cycle is more difficult than a walk cycle personally, because it has more posing and movement going on, I guess you could say. And in that aspect, one of the things that I would recommend for people that are like starting out to do run cycles is to look at references, you know, look at people running. watch people running, whether it be cartoons, real life, a mixture of the two perhaps, and try to get a general idea of what that looks like. And then if you are like really struggling, perhaps look up like some specific tutorials on like the process or like the different cycles of running. Maybe look up like some animation guides online that have like a graph or like an image that can show you like the different poses and like what you're supposed to do to create a run cycle. For me personally, I have a pretty general idea of what I'm supposed to do to create a run cycle. I normally do like a couple different poses, one for like him touching off of the ground, him touching the ground, and then like, you know, his legs moving. For stick figures that don't have like different limbs, you only really have to make one cycle because both sides look basically the same, so you don't have to do 2 loops. But for people who say have like one arm that has a different accessory, you would have to loop it twice for like each leg and each arm, so that way it looks consistent when they're running, so it's not just them basically skipping with like the same arm and leg over and over. And besides that, the same tips from earlier apply. Just take your time, focus on the overall look of the animation and not just, oh, I need to do it this way and that way. Just do whatever looks best and feels most comfortable to you. And with all of that out of the way, I'm going to let the time-lapse go a bit for itself, and then I'm going to show the final product of this animation, and then we'll move on to the final portion of the video. Thank you guys so much for following along with this video and watching until the end. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to like the video and comment down below what your favorite part of the video was. And if you want me to like make more tutorials in like this style and like this beginner stick note series, and what kind of topics you might want me to touch on next. With all that out of the way, I will see you guys in my next video, and I hope you all enjoyed. Bye-bye.
Rest in peace, my granny, she got hit by a bazooka. Yeah, I think about it every time I hit the hookah.